In this video, we talk about importing a CSV file as a data frame in R. Alright, so let's go ahead and get into it. Now, a few basics first. Usually, the first row of a CSV file is usually header information, and some good rules of thumb are to use lowercase for this header information. Also, if there's multiple words in your header title, it's best to not use spaces between those words. Instead, use an underscore or maybe a period between the words. Also, don't use symbols, like don't use apostrophes, don't use commas, don't use quotes, don't use dollar signs, don't use percentage signs, don't use anything like that in your header titles. It just can mess things up, but it also helps you keep things organized and systematic and everything. Also, you might want to shorten your header titles. Like if you have crazy long header titles, we want to shorten them so they're easier to reference. And so a good idea would be to go in there and edit your CSV file and change the headers manually like that. Alternatively, you can change your headers from within R, and I'll have another video on how to do that. So if you do need to change your header names, you can do it manually by editing the CSV file, or you can do it within R. But anyway, the function we use to look at or pull in a CSV file, and we're going to be pulling the CSV file in as a data frame, and we can do all sorts of stuff with data frames. I'll have a bunch of videos on data frames, which you'll probably want to check out next. But the function we use to do that is read, and I'm in the wrong spot, read.csv, and then the parentheses. And between these parentheses, the argument we're going to enter is where the file is, and there's other arguments we can enter as well. And we're going to talk about that right now. So I'm going to run the help on this real quick, and let me make this a tad bit bigger, and we'll look at it together for a second here. So it loads up a few different examples. We got read.table, read.csv, which is what we're talking about here, CSV2, delim, delim2, and then definitions of the arguments. There's also ways to read Excel files, so like .xlsx, and also like XLM or XML files. So there's other file types you can go ahead and read, and the same concepts apply. I recommend just Googling it, and if you understand how to read a CSV, reading the other file types is the same type of concept. And I want to point out a couple of things right here. So you could use read.table to import a CSV file if you want to. I mean, we're going to use read.csv because it's like specially built for CSV files. But I do want to point out a couple differences real quick. So the first argument is the file, so same there. But header on read.table is set to false on default, whereas with CSV it's set to true. Also, the separator is different. So here, the separator is a space versus a comma right here, which of course separates a comma separated values document, right? So you can use .table or read.table versus read.csv if you want to, but I just wanted to point out that there's a couple arguments you might need to change around if you're using read.table, but we're going to use read.csv. Hey, sorry for the interruption, but I was editing this video and I wanted to point out that the read.table is usually used for like a text file or something that's not a CSV. So if you have your data stored as a text file, a read.table could be a good option to import your text file data. So that's where you probably use read.table, and of course you'd use read.csv with a CSV file. Back to your video. And so now we're going to go ahead and use this function to create a couple data frames and test it out a couple different ways. So let's come over and get started here. So the first example I want to go ahead and do is read.csv, and let me go ahead and name this data frame real quick. So I'll call it election 2020, and then I'll go ahead and store it, read.csv, and I'm going to use the file.choose function here, file.choose. And then if we run this real quick, we get the opportunity to go ahead and select the file we want to go ahead and use. So I got my election 2020 CSV file right here. I load that in, and then I can go ahead and take a look at my data frame, and we see it all loaded in here, and it's broken down by a couple columns, as you see when we scroll through it. So it's obviously kind of hard to read down here in the console. However, I think that you get the idea. So that's how to use the file.choose function. Pretty simple to use. Alternatively, we can go ahead and navigate directly to the file if we want to do that. So we'll change this. I'll put v2 here, read.csv, and then I'm going to throw in the path to my file. So it's C, and then / users, / and then my username, / desktop, election 2020.csv. I'll go ahead and run that real quick. Now we see over here in the global environment, my election 2020 version 2, we have 31,242 observations as 6 variables, which matches the previous data frame that we loaded in here. So we would assume if I run this and look at it real quick, we get the same results as if I ran it previously when I did the file choose method. So that's another way to go ahead and load in a CSV file, just to give it the direct path to that CSV file. And you'll notice that I had to use 2 forward slashes instead of 1. So even though like normally, like when you're navigating your computer, you use the 1 forward slash. However, when you're doing it in R and some other languages, you do need to do 2 slashes because otherwise it just doesn't work. And I'm sure there's a technical reason that it doesn't work, but it's beyond my pay grade. I just know that 2 forward slashes does the trick. So if you're navigating that way, 2 forward slashes is how you go ahead and do it. A third way is to go ahead and set your working directory to where your file is. And this is probably the best way to do it, is to work wherever you're saving your R file, work out of that location and have all your supporting documents in that same file location. So to do that, we'll go ahead and get our working directory real quick. So get WD stands for get working directory. And we see where we're working out of. So I'm working out of my desktop already, but let's say that I was working somewhere else. So we could go ahead and do set working directory. And let's say that I want to go to my C // users sicken documents and run that real quick. And now if I run the get working directory, we see that I'm now in the documents folder instead of the desktop folder. So that's how you go ahead and you can change your working directory. Let me go ahead and change back to desktop. All right, so now I'm working back out of my desktop, which is where my file is stored. So now that I'm working out of the location where my file is, it's real easy to call it in. Let me go ahead and copy this real quick so I don't have to type it all out again. So we'll do version 3. And now, since I'm already in the directory where my file is, I can just reference the file name itself. So election2020.csv. I run that real quick. We see that it went ahead and added it to my global environment here. Same number of observations and variables, so that's a good sign. And of course, if I go ahead and I take a look at it and run it real quick, we get the same information, same output as the other 2 methods where we did file choose and also where we directly navigated to our file. So setting the working directory is another way to go ahead and accomplish the task of reading your CSV file. And also it's just good practice to be working out of the same directory where all your documents and files are that you're doing your analysis and all that type of stuff. So anyway, that's how you use the read.csv function to import CSV files as data frames into R. And again, if you understand this function, then knowing how to import other file types will be a piece of cake. You can Google it, figure out what function you need to import, like an Excel file. And the same way to navigate to whatever file you're trying to open will apply, and it'll all come together and be easy to do. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you did, I appreciate any sorts of likes, comments, subscribes, anything like that, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.